So there was a recent poll that was done by Pew Research, and it came out that 78% of Americans agree on one thing. I think that's sort of startling to find that you have 78% of people agree on anything these days. But what they discover is that 78% of Americans believe that things are getting worse, that we are morally worse. And so the follow-up question of whether or not we are getting worse is why? And how does that shake out? What does it look like? In what ways are we getting worse? And the number one response of 78% of Americans says that there is a lack of kindness in our culture. That more than anything else, we have lost the ability to treat one another with kindness. Now, I'm willing to bet, give everybody, including myself, the benefit of the doubt, and to suggest that nobody really wants to be that way, that we don't want to be jerks to one another. It's just that we need to be reminded, and we need to be encouraged to be kind. And so a central part of this campaign, this initiative in which we're involved in, is what we are in the midst of, a 30-day kindness challenge, in which we are every day for 30 days inviting each of us to engage in an intentional act of kindness, to do just one thing a day, to practice some specific act of kindness over and above just being polite, but to do something. As I pointed out last week, we've got about 3,000 members in this congregation, and if all 3,000 of us did one thing every day for 30 days, that would be 90,000 intentional acts of kindness. And we believe that has to move the needle in some way, shape, or form in a world in which there is so much conflict, so much polarization, so much pain. And a part of that, yesterday, about 150 of us all took part in a service day in which we, all ages, all abilities, went out into the community and served in different places and ways with different ministry partners to make a positive impact in our city. There was a group of children and their families that met here at the church, and they packaged up bags of beans and rice. You can see the fruit of their labors out in the gallery this morning that they will be taking in the next day or two to food pantries. I was a part of a group that worked on a Habitat for Humanity build. And I shared that this morning at the 9 o'clock service, and someone came up to me afterward and said, with all due respect, Russ, I'm not sure I would like to live in a house in which you were responsible for the construction. And at first, I was offended, as you might be, but then I realized that I have bruises on my hands from where I hit my hand with a hammer more often than I hit the nail, and so I think she's probably right. This call to kindness is not a new idea. In fact, you heard the prophet Micah. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God? Also, one of my favorite scriptures as well. And one of the things that I've always noticed about this text is that Micah doesn't say, you know what, I've got an idea. He doesn't say, here's a suggestion. He doesn't say, you know, you might try justice and kindness and humility. He says this is what God requires of you. Very strong language, a very bold statement. This is what you are required to do. Now, one of the words that Micah uses here is the Hebrew word chesed. Chesed is used over 250 times in the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures. And there's a lot of different ways to translate chesed, sort of like agape in the New Testament, which means a selfless love, but not necessarily a love that is all about feelings. It's more of a sacred love. It's about how you treat one another, and in the same way, Hesed is like that. And it's hard to find just one word in our language that encompasses the full meaning of hesed. And so, depending on the translation of Bible in which you read, you might find all sorts of different words used to translate hesed, things like compassion and mercy, kindness, grace, unmerited favor, steadfast love, a loyalty. In the NRSV, which we read from a moment ago, the Bible that is in your pew pocket sitting there in front of you, they use the word kindness. I want you to notice that of all those things that I mentioned, of which hesed represents, that those are all characteristics, that are all qualities of God, different ways that God cares for us, different things that God offers us. Compassion and mercy and kindness and grace, steadfast love, loyalty. These are the things that God offers us, but also, as we heard, what God expects of us, requires of us. I mentioned that this word appears 250 times in the Hebrew Scriptures. In the NRSV, 174 times it's translated as steadfast love, which is a loyalty, a commitment to others. Now, whenever I do a wedding ceremony, whether it be here or someplace out in the community, I always talk about a love that this couple will need to have in the days and months and years ahead, a love that plain and simply does not give up on the other person. It is steadfast. It's not an emotional love. It's not a feeling love, but a commitment to live in a certain way, to love in a certain way. It's not a once and for all commitment to live and to love, but to choose each day to live and to love in a way that is steadfast. But here in Micah 6:8, the translators use kindness. And as I said a moment ago, kindness seems to be in short supply these days. And so this morning, I want to make a case for kindness. I wonder if this is one of those things that we say is good, that we say is important, but collectively, at least at this point in our history, we're not very good at it. Maybe the reason that it's in short supply is that we have a hard time describing it, defining what kindness is. It's like some other things that we don't know how to define it, but we sure know when we see it. Bruce Reyes Chow is a friend of mine. He and I went to seminary together, and a couple of years ago, he wrote a book called In Defense of Kindness, and the subtitle is Why It Matters, How It Changes Lives, and How It Can Save the World, which is a pretty bold statement that kindness can save the world. Our elders read this book together over the summer, and just a couple of weeks ago at our most recent elders meeting, Bruce joined us via Zoom to talk to us about the book and this call to kindness. And in the book, he offers us a working definition of what kindness is. He says it's to be kind is to accept that each person is created in a complex human being and to treat them as if you believe that to be true. To recognize that every person that we encounter is a person of God, a child of God, complex and created in the very image of God, and then we treat that person in such a way that says that we believe this to be true. That means, of course, everyone. If all of us are created in the image of God, that means everyone. That annoying neighbor that you can't stand, that politician that stands for everything that you are against and is against everything for which you stand. That person in the car next to you at the stoplight that has his stereo up so loud that it is vibrating your windows. Yes, that person is a child of God. The unhoused person at the corner asking for help. All of us. Every single one of us, created and complex. And to be kind is to treat everyone as if we believe that to be true. Now, I want to be clear that kindness is more than just not being rude or mean or hateful. It is more than just being indifferent. It's not about just being nice. It's a conscious effort to live in such a way towards other people, accepting them as they are and treating them as children of God. Even those, especially those with whom you disagree. Now, I want to talk for just a moment about the power of kindness, because there's been a number of studies that have been done recently that says that it can have a powerful impact, not just on the person that receives the kindness, but the person that acts in a kind way. Researchers at UC Berkeley found that people who were kind tended to have a higher self-esteem, a greater sense of self-efficacy, less depression, less anxiety, and overall improved physical health. They learned that people who were kind regularly engage in acts of kindness have a higher well-being across the board. In other words, when we are well in spirit and body and in mind, we are better equipped to handle the obstacles that come with strength, with clarity, with calmness. Across the board, physically, it lowers our blood pressure, it helps us sleep better, it lowers our risk for heart disease and cancer, it improves our immune system. You know, a lot of us spend a lot of money on gym memberships and trying to get fit. Perhaps the greatest exercise that we can engage in is to practice Hesed. Maybe if we exercised that kindness muscle, we would become more fit than ever before. Physically, emotionally, relationships are more meaningful. We experience less stress. Marriages tend to last longer. I also learned recently that there is a growing movement that says that kindness is one of the leading factors in terms of success in the business world as well. Ann Weaver is the CEO of Salesforce, a huge, huge company. 72,000 employees, the 61st largest company in the world, valued at $153 billion. And she says that one of the company's top strategies, the top strategy of one of the leading companies in the world, is to lead with kindness. She said, when thinking about how to run a company, how to lead people, we don't talk nearly enough about the power of kindness. Leading with kindness is a strength that should be cultivated and encouraged. It's not a weakness, as we often think, but one of our greatest strengths. You know, when she says this, she sounds an awful lot like Fred Rogers, who we talked about a few weeks ago, who once famously said that there are 3 ways to ultimate success. The first is to be kind. The second is to be kind. And the third way to ultimate success is to always be kind. Think about it. Who doesn't want to be waited on by a server, a wait person who is unkind to us? Who wouldn't want to work for a boss, for a supervisor who leads with kindness? Who among us doesn't want to have coworkers who embody kindness? You see, here's the thing. I also believe, in addition to being a beneficial to our own physical and emotional health, to being a success in business, I also believe that Hesed, that kindness, that mercy, that steadfast love might just be the critical ingredient for depolarizing our nation. Don't get me wrong. It's not going to solve our differences. We're always going to have our differences. You heard a moment ago that at the very beginning I talked about 75%, which is a huge amount. We're never going to agree on everything. And I would argue, too, that those differences are important. It's beneficial for us not to agree on everything. As I like to say, if you and I agree on everything, one of us is unnecessary. That we need those different perspectives. We need to have people that come together to work out our differences, to help us come up with nuance and compromise in order to create a better country, a better world, to help us solve our problems in ways that are just and kind and fair. Sometimes we forget that our nation was designed in such a way that we can have vigorous debate and to embrace those differences that we have, but we can't do that if we can't listen to one another. If we don't show kindness, we'll never find those solutions. Some of you may have watched the vice presidential debate this last weekend. One of the things that jumped out at me in listening to the pundits afterwards is all of them, almost across the board, remarked with a curious look on their face about how there was civility in this debate, that they were nice to each other, that they even agreed on things. And across the board, they all talked about how this was such a shock. It was unusual. It was refreshing. And the reason that it was refreshing is because kindness and civility has been missing from so much of our discourse over the last several weeks and months. Now, I want to be clear. I want to be crystal clear that I'm not talking about a particular person or politician, and I'm not talking about a particular party. I'm talking about all parties, all politicians, up and down the ballots. Did you know that some of the most caustic candidates, some of the nastiest fights are taking place these days are races for which people are vying to be on local school boards? There was another poll that was done a couple of years ago, back in 2022. And they found that 75%, not 78, not quite 78, but 75% of Americans, conservatives and liberals and everyone in between, when surveyed, agreed with this statement. And let me read you the statement and see if you agree with it. And the statement was this: to restore peace and unity, we need leaders to model kindness and understanding, even with people they disagree with. Leaders must show the way forward. Now, as I mentioned, 75% heard that statement and said, yes, that. We need more of that. And so that's what part of this campaign, this grassroots initiative is all about. That's what we're standing up for. That's what we're advocating for. That's the reason we put signs on the street corners to call our leaders and those who want to be our leaders to model that kindness and understanding. That part of what we're saying is that what's going to get you elected to lead us is an invitation to lead with kindness and not with the unkind, heartless way of doing politics, which has become the norm. But also what this initiative is about is recognizing that we can't wait for our leaders to lead us, to model that for us, that we need to model that for our leaders. And so that's the reason, not just that we put the signs on the street corners next to the other political campaign signs, but we put them in our own front yards, because I don't know about you, but when I put my sign in my front yard, I thought, oh my gosh, now I actually have to love my neighbor. Now I actually have to do it. So what if we model for our leaders the kindness and the understanding towards people we disagree with? I think in a lot of ways that's what Paul was calling us to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with God, to be kind with one another. Tenderhearted was the word that Paul used. Forgiving one another as God has forgiven you. To find better solutions in order to create a more livable community, country, one that looks and acts more like the kingdom of God and less like the divided states of America. Calling us to love our neighbor, to practice hesed. You see, friends, nothing is lost and everything is gained when we treat each other with hesed, with kindness, with compassion, with respect, with those with whom we disagree, whether it be a little or a lot. And I don't know about you, but I need that reminder daily. And so I'm glad for, and I'm proud of this congregation, this community of faith that is doing all that we can to live in this way as we do our best to love our neighbor and to treat one another with kindness. May it be so. Amen.